It has become the Skid Row for RV homelessness in LA County. People without a home living in hundreds of RVs.
Begin with the horrific crash of a tour bus in western New York outside of the city of Buffalo.
There's a hidden war happening on America's streets. Not against crime, not against danger, but against the poor who live in RVs. Every parking lot, every curb, every rest stop has become a battlefield where laws erase homes on wheels. Homelessness isn't being fixed, it's being punished. Let's get rolling. Across dozens of American cities, new ordinances are making it illegal for RVs to park overnight on public streets, even when the vehicles are well maintained and not blocking traffic.
Along the peninsula, and they're attracting people from all walks of life. Night Beat's Joe Vasquez is in San Mateo County with the staggering new numbers.
For the growing number of people who call their RVs home because they can't afford traditional housing or campgrounds, these laws create an impossible situation. The penalties are harsh. Fines typically range from $50 to $150 per citation, with enforcement officers often issuing tickets in the early morning while residents sleep. For someone already struggling financially, just 2 tickets in a week can mean hundreds of dollars in debt. Repeat violations can lead to vehicle impoundment, with release fees exceeding $500, costs that can permanently separate people from their only shelter. These ordinances force RV dwellers into constant motion, unable to establish any stability in a community. They can't maintain jobs, receive mail, or access services when they're required to keep moving every night. While cities frame these rules as public safety measures, they effectively criminalize poverty. For people living in RVs out of necessity rather than choice, no overnight parking laws don't solve homelessness. They just make survival illegal, pushing vulnerable residents further to society's margins. In cities nationwide, oversized vehicle restrictions require RVs and large vans to move every 2 to 4 hours.
Get a handle on the hundreds of trashed RVs that are just showing up on city streets, many with homeless people living inside.
City leaders say the problem is actually an epidemic. Our Lisa Balick is live at Lentz Park. So Lisa,
a rule designed to prevent abandoned vehicles, but creating devastating consequences for families living in their vehicles. For homeless RV residents, this means waking up multiple times daily to relocate their entire home, then desperately searching for another legal parking spot. The financial toll is crushing. Constant relocations can add $150 to $200 monthly in fuel costs alone, money these families don't have. Meanwhile, enforcement officers specifically target RVs that appear to be permanent residences, making tickets almost inevitable. Private parking lots charge $20 to $40 daily, far beyond most families' budgets. This forced mobility destroys any sense of stability or safety. Parents can't establish routines for children, workers struggle to maintain employment, and everyone lives in constant fear of the next citation or tow truck. What appears on paper as neutral vehicle regulation becomes, in practice, a relentless eviction system. These families aren't choosing this lifestyle. They're trapped in it, criminalized for the basic human need for shelter and rest. The cruelest housing ordinance may be the simplest: laws that make it illegal to sleep in your vehicle. For people whose car, van, or RV has become their only shelter after losing housing, these bans criminalize the most basic human need: rest. Cities like Los Angeles impose fines of $25 to $75 for first-time sleeping violations, with penalties escalating for repeat offenses. But the real trauma comes at 2 or 3 a.m. when officers bang on vehicle doors, forcing exhausted families, including children, awake and demanding they move immediately. A single neighbor complaint can trigger this midnight harassment. Unlike apartment dwellers facing eviction, vehicle residents have nowhere to go. Their home is also their transportation, leaving them driving in circles through the night, burning precious fuel just to avoid citations. Children suffer interrupted sleep cycles while parents live in constant anxiety about the next knock on the door. These laws don't solve homelessness, they criminalize it.
News investigation into what's essentially becoming homeless encampments on wheels. So-called van lords are renting out RVs to people who are now using them as their permanent residence. Who's behind these rented rides and is doing this even legal? Here's Eyewitness News reporter Christian Cordero.
What was once a housing crisis becomes a criminal justice problem. trapping families in an expensive cycle of tickets, court appearances, and sleepless nights. For people already struggling with poverty, banning sleep transforms survival into a crime, making it nearly impossible to rest long enough to rebuild their lives. Many cities now require permits or reservations for overnight RV parking in designated areas. While this system works for middle-class tourists planning weekend getaways, it creates an insurmountable barrier for people living in their vehicles out of necessity.
Well, the Low Income Housing Institute is the group tasked with pulling this off. They say they're looking at about 12 sites right now, have yet to narrow it down to where this could actually become a reality, though they say the services they provide.
Permits typically cost $15 to $40 per night, totaling $450 to $1,200 monthly, equivalent to apartment rent that these residents couldn't afford in the first place. When you're already choosing between fuel and food, permit fees become impossible luxuries. The reservation system makes things worse. Permits often sell out weeks in advance, requiring the kind of long-term planning that's impossible when you're living paycheck to paycheck or check to check. Homeless RV dwellers can't book next month's parking when they're not sure where tomorrow's meal will come from. Miss a permit? Face fines up to $200, nearly a week's worth of groceries.
Amanda and Mark, we stood here a week and a half ago and told you about that RV going through the pool house wall today. Seattle police told me that they're still looking for 2 suspects. The loss expected to be here now more than $300,000, but the owner...
This creates a 2-tiered system. Acceptable RVers with disposable income get legal spaces, while the poorest residents are pushed into hidden, unsafe areas where they risk citations and towing. Rather than providing affordable solutions for those who need shelter most, permit systems erect financial walls that force homeless families further into the shadows, criminalizing poverty while protecting privilege. Cities nationwide enforce 72-hour rules, requiring RVs to relocate every few days, even from legal parking spots. While designed to prevent permanent encampments, these laws trap vehicle residents in an exhausting cycle that makes normal life impossible. Consider the impossible logistics: a parent trying to maintain their child's school routine while moving their entire home every other day, a worker attempting to hold down a local job while constantly relocating, someone recovering from illness forced to pack up and drive while still sick. The financial toll is devastating. Moving a large RV every 48 to 72 hours burns $100 to $150 weekly in fuel, money these families desperately need for food and basic necessities. Constant engine starts and stops accelerate mechanical wear, leading to expensive breakdowns that can strand families permanently. When an RV breaks down and can't move by the deadline, it becomes an easy impound target, potentially costing someone their only shelter. Families live in constant stress, never able to establish routines or feel secure. These rules don't address homelessness, they institutionalize instability. By treating homes on wheels as temporary nuisances rather than legitimate housing, cities force their most vulnerable residents onto an expensive, exhausting treadmill where stability becomes impossible. Many RV parks enforce a strict 10-year rule, banning any recreational vehicle older than a decade, regardless of its condition or maintenance. This seemingly cosmetic policy creates a devastating barrier for people living in their RVs out of necessity. While affluent travelers can afford newer rigs costing $40,000 to $100,000, homeless families typically rely on older, affordable units from the 1990s or 2000s. These vehicles may be mechanically sound and well cared for, but their age alone disqualifies them from safe, legal camping spaces. The rule forces the most vulnerable RV residents back onto streets where enforcement is harshest. Some parks offer exceptions, but the application process, requiring photos, inspections, and additional fees, creates yet another obstacle for families already struggling with basic survival. For people who've lost traditional housing, being rejected based on their RV's age feels like discrimination against poverty itself. The message is clear: only those who can afford newer equipment deserve safe places to park. This private business policy functions as economic gatekeeping, separating desirable tourists from those living in vehicles out of desperation. Instead of providing inclusive shelter options, the 10-year rule pushes homeless families into industrial areas, remote lots, and other dangerous locations where they remain hidden and unsafe. For people living in RVs without electrical hookups, portable generators provide essential power for heating, cooling, and food storage. But noise ordinances that ban generator use during quiet hours, typically 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., create deadly dilemmas for homeless families. These are precisely the hours when power is most critical. Frigid winter nights requiring heat, scorching summer evenings needing air conditioning, or anytime food must stay refrigerated. For elderly residents or those with medical conditions, losing climate control isn't just uncomfortable, it can be fatal. Alternative power sources like battery banks and solar systems cost $1,000 to $5,000, far beyond the reach of people already choosing between fuel and food. This leaves families facing an impossible choice: risk $100 to $300 fines for running their generator, or endure potentially dangerous conditions inside their only shelter. Enforcement often follows neighbor complaints, meaning a single call can bring police to shut down someone's only power source in the middle of the night. While noise ordinances help housed residents maintain peace and quiet, they strip homeless RVers of basic survival tools. What seems like a reasonable community standard becomes a life-threatening barrier for those with no other options, forcing them to choose between legal compliance and staying alive through the night. Owning land should mean freedom to live on it, but zoning laws across America make it illegal to reside full-time in an RV, even on your own property. This devastating restriction eliminates what seems like the most obvious solution for homeless RV families: parking on a friend's lot, family land, or their own purchased acreage. Cities justify these rules as protecting sanitation standards and property values, but they effectively criminalize one of the few affordable housing options available to struggling families. Violations can trigger weekly fines of $500 to $2,000, threatening to bankrupt low-income landowners who dare to offer help.
The city of Olympia is trying something new that no other city in our region has done before. It will allow RVs to stay parked on a city street indefinitely if its occupants abide by a set of rules.
Fox 13's Matt Markovich joins us now. So Matt,
rural areas offer no escape. Building codes typically require permanent structures before anyone can legally occupy land. This forces RV residents back into public spaces where street enforcement is harshest. The cruel irony is unmistakable. People who scrape together money to buy land, hoping to escape the cycle of citations and displacement, discover they still can't legally live there. Those generous enough to offer their property as refuge face financial ruin through escalating fines. These zoning restrictions prove that homelessness isn't simply about lacking money. It's about laws that systematically block people from accessing affordable solutions. When even private property ownership can't provide legal shelter, the system has criminalized poverty itself. For homeless RV families, few nightmares compare to waking up to find their home gone, towed by city enforcement for parking violations, unpaid fines, or abandoned vehicle designations. Recovery is virtually impossible. Towing fees start around $350, while daily storage charges of $50 to $100 accumulate relentlessly. For people already living paycheck to paycheck, these costs might as well be millions. Within weeks, accumulated fees often exceed the RV's actual value, prompting authorities to auction it off rather than wait for payment. This isn't just losing transportation, it's losing everything. Families watch their shelter, belongings, medications, identification documents, and sometimes even pets disappear in a single enforcement action. Years of accumulated possessions, irreplaceable photos, and survival essentials vanish into an impound lot they'll never be able to afford.
So Hunt says if you are living out of an RV or trailer, you technically do have shelter, making you ineligible for either of the pellet shelter or tourist shelter sites, or even that alternate third camping ground site.
Cities justify these aggressive impound policies as keeping streets clear, but they rarely offer alternatives for suddenly displaced families. Instead of solving homelessness, towing deepens it. Lose your RV, and you're thrust onto the street with no resources or path back to stability. For someone whose rig represents their only lifeline, a tow truck isn't merely an inconvenience. It's a devastating forced eviction that can destroy years of progress toward rebuilding their life. leaving them more vulnerable than ever. Highway rest stops once provided safe refuge for all travelers, but new restrictions across many states now ban overnight sleeping, posting signs warning no overnight camping or limiting stays to just 2 hours. For people living in RVs, this eliminates crucial safe spaces. Rest areas offered homeless RV families something invaluable: well-lit, patrolled environments safer than the alternatives. With these havens now off-limits, families are forced into dangerous back roads, deserted industrial zones, and isolated lots where crime rates soar and help is far away. States enforce these bans with $50 to $100 tickets, while repeat violators face towing, the ultimate threat for someone whose vehicle is their only shelter. The cruel irony is unmistakable. These facilities were built with taxpayer money, yet the citizens who need them most are explicitly banned. For nomadic workers traveling between cities for temporary jobs, rest areas provided predictable places to regroup safely. Now survival requires constant searching for hidden corners to park, dramatically increasing both stress and physical danger. What seems like a reasonable policy to prevent loitering actually removes one of the last public spaces where vulnerable people could rest without harassment or fear of violence. For families living in their RVs, losing access to rest stops means losing their safest option for sleep. Cities nationwide are enacting sweeping public camping bans that classify sleeping in any vehicle on public land as criminal trespassing. Sidewalks, parks, and even vacant lots become forbidden territory for people whose RV is their only shelter.
In Los Angeles, a place to park is fast becoming a place to start over for thousands of people there living in RVs.
Under these laws, a family quietly parked on an unused city lot faces the same penalties as someone breaking into private property. Fines typically start at $150, but refusing to leave can trigger misdemeanor charges, turning poverty into a criminal record that haunts families for years. This criminalization creates a vicious cycle. Homeless families accumulate charges that later disqualify them from jobs and housing opportunities, making escape from homelessness even harder. Children watch their parents get arrested simply for existing without traditional shelter. The cruelest aspect is that these bans rarely come with increased shelter capacity. Cities aren't solving homelessness, they're just pushing it out of sight, forcing families into more remote and dangerous locations. For RV dwellers already facing stigma and rejection, camping bans deliver a clear message. You don't belong anywhere, not even on unused public ground that taxpayers fund. Rather than designating safe areas where families can legally exist while rebuilding their lives, these laws treat basic survival as criminal trespassing, deepening both vulnerability and desperation, while criminalizing the fundamental human need for shelter. Perhaps the cruelest twist in anti-RV legislation is how it criminalizes those who try to help. Many jurisdictions now impose hefty fines, often $1,000 per violation, on property owners who allow RVs to park on their lots, even temporarily. Churches that once opened parking lots for safe parking programs face shutdown under zoning codes. Nonprofits offering overnight refuge get hit with nuisance violations. Neighbors who might offer their driveway to a struggling family stay silent, terrified of penalties that could bankrupt them. This systematic criminalization of compassion cuts homeless RV families off from informal support networks that once filled gaps in social services. Small acts of kindness, letting someone park overnight, share an electrical outlet, or use a restroom, become legal liabilities rather than community solutions. The message is unmistakable. Not only are homeless families unwelcome, but anyone who shows them mercy will be punished too. This isolates vulnerable people completely, eliminating the grassroots solidarity that communities have always used to help neighbors in crisis. When laws make basic human decency illegal, homelessness transforms from a personal struggle into a manufactured crisis enforced by policy. Rather than addressing root causes of poverty, these rules punish both victims and helpers, creating a society where survival becomes a crime and compassion carries criminal penalties. For housed families, letting vehicle registration or insurance lapse means an inconvenient trip to the DMV. For people living in their RV, it can trigger the loss of their only shelter. Cities exploit these technical violations as justification for aggressive enforcement. A missed $200 registration renewal, impossible when choosing between food and paperwork, becomes grounds for impoundment. Once tagged for expired tags, families often have just 48 hours before towing begins. The mathematics of destruction are swift. $350 average towing cost, plus $50 to $75 daily impound fees, mean a family needs over $1,000 within a week to reclaim their home. For people already unable to afford basic registration, these sums might as well be millions. The system's cruelty deepens when you consider that many RV dwellers can't even receive renewal notices. They lack stable mailing addresses to get the paperwork that keeps them legal. This creates an impossible catch-22. You need an address to maintain vehicle registration, but you need legal vehicle registration to have a place to live. Rather than recognizing these bureaucratic barriers, enforcement uses them as weapons against the poorest residents. A single piece of expired paperwork becomes the legal trigger for destroying someone's last safety net, turning administrative poverty into homelessness with ruthless efficiency. Living in an RV requires regular waste disposal, gray water from sinks and black water from toilets.
Road, right next to St. Peter's Providence Hospital in Olympia, where RVs have been parking illegally for years, but now something new. Permitted RV encampment parking on a public street.
For middle-class RVers, this means routine stops at campground dump stations. For homeless families, it becomes an impossible financial burden that can destroy their lives. Dump fees range from $10 to $25 per visit, with many facilities tied to campgrounds charging full overnight rates just for access. When families can't afford these costs, choosing between food and waste disposal, they face an agonizing dilemma with no legal solution. Cities enforce sanitation codes ruthlessly, imposing fines of $500 to $1,000 for illegal dumping, even when someone pours out a small bucket of gray water. A single violation can financially devastate families already choosing between fuel and meals. Enforcement sweeps often use sanitation violations as pretext to clear entire RV communities, labeling all vehicles as public health hazards. Yet these same cities rarely provide free or affordable waste disposal alternatives, creating a system designed to trap people in violation. The cruel mathematics are inescapable. Staying sanitary requires money these families don't have, but remaining unsanitary triggers devastating penalties. This isn't public health protection. It's criminalizing basic human biology. Rather than providing accessible waste disposal solutions, cities use sanitation laws as weapons against their most vulnerable residents, forcing them to choose between poverty and prosecution for the crime of being human. Faced with increasingly hostile laws, homeless RV families develop elaborate survival strategies that exploit legal technicalities while avoiding outright violations. The most common is the 72-hour shuffle, moving every 2 to 3 days, sometimes just around the block, to reset enforcement timers. This cat-and-mouse game demands constant vigilance and planning. Families memorize which streets have which time limits, when enforcement officers patrol, and how far they must move to avoid recognition. Some park in industrial areas overnight where enforcement is lighter, then relocate to safer neighborhoods during daylight hours. Others invest in periodic campground stays, a single night weekly, to generate receipts proving legal parking if questioned. Some rely on borrowed driveways from sympathetic friends, though this risks zoning violations that could bankrupt the property owner. A few families coordinate movements between multiple cities, staying just ahead of local enforcement patterns while burning through precious fuel. While these workarounds can buy temporary reprieve, they extract a devastating toll. Constant stress, mounting fuel costs, and permanent instability that prevents families from establishing any routines or relationships. The very existence of these elaborate survival strategies exposes how little legal space actually exists for vehicle dwellers. Rather than solving homelessness, restrictive ordinances force people into exhausting games of bureaucratic survival that wear down their health, finances, and hope, keeping them moving but never bringing them closer to actual stability or dignity. The future for homeless RV families hangs in the balance as two opposing forces shape policy nationwide. Cities face a critical choice that will determine whether vehicle dwelling becomes impossible or evolves into a legitimate housing solution. The crackdown path leads toward increasingly harsh restrictions, expanded street parking bans, stricter permit requirements, and aggressive towing programs. If these trends continue, urban areas could become completely inaccessible to RV dwellers, forcing vulnerable families into dangerous rural isolation where services don't exist. The compassionate path shows growing promise through innovative programs. Some communities are launching safe parking initiatives where churches and nonprofits provide secure lots with restrooms and stability. A few forward-thinking cities have piloted designated RV zones, recognizing that homes on wheels are still legitimate homes. Nonprofits increasingly frame this as a housing and public health issue rather than a law enforcement problem. The stakes couldn't be higher. Continued crackdowns will simply convert RV homelessness into street homelessness, making the crisis more visible and dangerous while solving nothing. But pragmatic solutions, safe parking areas, affordable dump stations, and supportive services could transform RV living from a survival trap into a stepping stone toward stability. The next decade's direction depends entirely on whether policymakers choose to see RV dwellers as nuisances to eliminate or neighbors deserving protection and pathways to permanent housing. One knock on the door can erase an entire home. That's the reality RV dwellers face every night. What do you think? Should cities keep cracking down or finally create real solutions? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't miss our next video where we dive even deeper into the struggles RVers face on the road. See you there.